It was a humid evening in Miami, Florida. The kind of night where the air felt thick, as though the sky itself was holding its breath. The lights from the skyscrapers glistened like fireflies in the distance, while the sound of the ocean waves crashing against the shore whispered secrets that no one had been brave enough to uncover. In a luxurious penthouse overlooking Biscayne Bay, Victor Monroe, a wealthy businessman in his late 40s, was hosting one of his infamous parties. He was known for his charm, his wealth, and his ability to win over anyone in a room. He owned several successful businesses, including real estate ventures and a high-end marketing firm. His name was synonymous with power in Florida's elite circles. Tonight, however, Victor was celebrating more than just business successes. It was his 50th birthday, and the mood was electric. The guest list was carefully curated, filled with socialites, investors, politicians, and the most influential people in the state. The drinks flowed freely, and the music echoed through the penthouse as laughter filled the air. But underneath the polished surface of the party, there was an undercurrent of tension. Everyone knew about Victor's reputation with women. His marriage to Emily Monroe, a beautiful woman in her mid-30s, was on the rocks. Emily, who had given birth to their son just a year ago, spent most of her time away from her husband, focusing on her charity work. Victor, on the other hand, had a tendency to seek attention from other women, especially younger ones. That evening, however, his attention was on someone specific: his son's pregnant wife, Samantha Monroe. Samantha, only 24, was in the early stages of her pregnancy, glowing with the excitement of impending motherhood. Her relationship with her husband, Victor's son, Alex Monroe, had always been somewhat strained. Alex, a rising star in the business world, was constantly busy, leaving Samantha to feel lonely and isolated. At the party, Samantha found herself drawn to Victor's magnetic personality. He had always been kind to her, offering her advice and support when Alex couldn't. As the evening wore on, Victor's charm seemed to sweep her off her feet. Victor and Samantha shared a private moment on the balcony, overlooking the water. She felt a sense of comfort in his presence, a comfort she hadn't felt in a long time. But as they talked, something shifted between them, something deeper than a simple conversation. "You're beautiful tonight, Samantha," Victor said, his voice low and smooth, sending a shiver down her spine. She laughed softly, unsure of how to respond. "Thank you, Victor." Victor leaned in slightly, his breath warm against her ear. "I've always admired your strength, your grace. It takes a strong woman to keep everything together, especially in a marriage like yours." Samantha's heart raced. She couldn't help but feel a sense of admiration for the man before her, a man who had everything but still managed to make her feel special. But she knew she had to be careful. This was a dangerous game she was playing. Later that night, Victor and Samantha found themselves alone in one of the bedrooms. The music from the party seemed distant, almost surreal. They shared a kiss, and before Samantha knew it, they were tangled in each other's arms, giving in to the temptation that had been building between them for months. Victor was aware of the risks, but he didn't care. He had been in control of everything for so long, and now, in the heat of the moment, he felt invincible. Samantha, however, wasn't sure what had just happened. She knew it was wrong, but in that moment, she had never felt more alive. The next morning, Samantha woke up in the bed beside Victor. She had no recollection of how she had gotten there, and the reality of what had happened the night before hit her like a ton of bricks. She quickly dressed and slipped out of the penthouse, her heart heavy with guilt. As she left, she couldn't help but feel a sense of dread. What had she done? Victor, on the other hand, was already making plans for his next move. He was a man used to getting what he wanted, and now he wanted Samantha. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more between them, something that could change everything. Unbeknownst to Samantha, their actions that night would set in motion a series of events that would unravel the lives of everyone involved. Victor Monroe was everything that Samantha had dreamed of. At least that's what she thought. A successful businessman with a towering presence, Victor's reputation in Miami was larger than life. He was well known in high society, the type of man who could walk into any room and command attention. To the outside world, he appeared to have everything: a beautiful wife, an impressive career, and a picture-perfect life. But beneath the polished surface, there were secrets. Secrets that Samantha would soon learn all too well. Samantha, on the other hand, was far from the glamorous woman that Victor had become used to. She was young, idealistic, and somewhat naive, a far cry from the women who usually caught Victor's eye. She had met him through a mutual connection at a charity event where she worked as a volunteer. He had approached her, his charm immediately apparent, and they had exchanged a few pleasantries about the event. Samantha had been drawn to his confidence, the way he spoke with authority, and his natural charisma. What started as a harmless conversation soon turned into a series of late-night meetings and texts, and before long, the two were in an affair. Samantha had known it was wrong from the start. She was married to Alex Monroe, Victor's son, a man she had met in college. Alex, however, was nothing like his father. He was reserved, calm, and far less demanding than the forceful presence of Victor. Their marriage had always been a quiet one. While Alex loved her, he was often absent, absorbed in his work as a financial analyst, and their intimacy had faded over the years. Samantha had been searching for excitement, for something more than the monotonous routine of her everyday life, and Victor had offered her just that. Victor, for his part, was a man used to getting what he wanted. His power, wealth, and influence were enough to make anyone bend to his will, but he had a darker side, one that few saw. Beneath the charming facade, there was a man who had no qualms about stepping on others to get ahead. His affairs were not new. His marriage to Lisa had long been in shambles, held together by appearances more than genuine affection. Still, the affair with Samantha had been different. There was a fire between them, an intense chemistry that ignited whenever they were together. For Victor, it was more than just a fling. He had grown attached to Samantha in a way he hadn't with the others. But the affair came at a price. Samantha was now pregnant, a fact that she had tried to ignore for weeks. She had been hesitant to break the news to Victor, unsure of how he would react. Victor, however, was not the type to be caught off guard. He had his own ways of controlling situations, and this was no exception. As soon as he learned of her pregnancy, he made it clear that he would do whatever it took to ensure that no one found out. He had always been a man of action, and in this case, his actions would take a dark and dangerous turn. The relationship between Samantha and Victor began to change as her pregnancy progressed. Samantha, initially overwhelmed by the excitement of becoming a mother, began to feel trapped. She had started to see the darker side of Victor, the side that was manipulative and controlling. He insisted that she keep the pregnancy a secret, that no one could know, especially Alex. The pressure weighed heavily on her, and as much as she loved the idea of becoming a mother, she began to wonder if it was worth it to raise a child in such a tumultuous situation. Meanwhile, Alex was completely unaware of the affair. He had no idea that his wife was carrying his father's child. He had always been distant, wrapped up in his career, and trusted his wife to handle things at home. He never suspected that his father and his wife could be involved in such a betrayal. But that would all change. Samantha's internal conflict reached a breaking point when she realized that she could no longer hide the truth. She had been lying to Alex, lying to herself, and the guilt was suffocating. One evening, after a long conversation with a close friend, she decided she needed to come clean. She planned to tell Alex everything, about the affair, about the pregnancy, and the virus that had been passed to her in the course of her relationship with Victor. The HIV diagnosis, which had come a few weeks earlier, was the final piece of the puzzle. It weighed on Samantha like a heavy stone, and she knew she couldn't keep it from Alex much longer. Victor, however, was not about to let Samantha ruin everything. He had already seen how fragile his reputation was. One scandal could destroy everything he had built. He couldn't let the truth come out. Samantha's confession could not only destroy his marriage to Lisa, but also send shockwaves through his business dealings. His position in Miami's elite circles was built on his reputation, and he would go to any lengths to protect it. Victor confronted Samantha that night, his words cold and deliberate. "You can't tell him," he had said. "You have no idea what this could do to all of us. You can't just walk away from this. I won't let you." Samantha was scared. She knew that Victor had the power to make her life a living nightmare, but she had hope that she could still do the right thing. The decision she had made was now irrevocable, and she couldn't shake the feeling that there would be no way out of this situation. Victor's grip on her life was tightening with every passing day. The following days were filled with tension. Samantha tried to reach out to Alex, but she couldn't find the courage to tell him what had happened. Instead, she spent more time with Victor, who reassured her that everything would be fine, that they could keep the pregnancy a secret and find a way out of the mess they were in. But things were spiraling out of control. Samantha's health was deteriorating, and the weight of the secret was taking a toll on her. She was losing sleep, feeling nauseous, and her stress levels were skyrocketing. The fear of being caught, the fear of losing everything, was slowly eating away at her. And the one person she had trusted to help her, Victor, was becoming more and more distant, his obsession with maintaining control growing stronger. Samantha's world was falling apart, and she couldn't see a way out. The affair that had once been thrilling and exciting was now a nightmare she couldn't escape. The darkness that had been lurking beneath the surface was now fully exposed, and Samantha was trapped in a dangerous game where there were no winners. Samantha could feel the walls closing in around her. She had never imagined that the affair with Victor would lead to such a tangled mess. The secrecy, the guilt, and the fear of exposure weighed on her every moment. Her mind constantly raced, trying to find a way out. But every possible option seemed to carry a devastating consequence. The one thing she couldn't do was tell Alex. The truth would crush him, and she didn't know if their relationship could survive the shock of betrayal. But it wasn't just the affair that troubled Samantha. The HIV diagnosis had added a whole new layer of anxiety. She had learned about it just a month before, after a routine checkup at her doctor's office. The doctor had delivered the news softly, but the words hit her like a punch in the gut. "You've tested positive for HIV," the doctor had said. "It's important to start treatment immediately, but you'll need to inform your partner." Her heart had dropped. How could she tell Alex the truth about her health when she had already kept the affair from him? How could she live with herself knowing she had contracted the virus through Victor, of all people? Victor, of course, had dismissed her concerns. "It's just a minor setback," he had told her, as if it were something she could simply ignore. "We'll figure it out, Samantha. We can manage this. No one else needs to know." His dismissive attitude had only made her feel more alone in the situation. He had never been one to fully consider the consequences of his actions, and now it seemed he was only concerned with preserving his own image. As the days passed, Samantha found herself growing more withdrawn. The pregnancy was progressing, but her body felt weaker with each passing day. The nausea persisted, and she was constantly exhausted. She hadn't been able to tell anyone the full truth about the affair, the HIV diagnosis, or her growing fear that Victor would do anything to keep her quiet. Then one night, just as she had resolved to finally confess everything to Alex, things took a turn for the worse. Samantha had been on the phone with Alex, trying to muster the courage to tell him what had been happening, when she heard a knock at the door. Startled, she quickly ended the call and went to answer. When she opened the door, she was met with Victor's icy gaze. "You're not going to tell him," Victor said coldly. There was no question in his voice, only a statement of fact. His tone sent a chill down her spine. "I told you, you're not telling anyone about this." Samantha recoiled. "Victor, I can't keep living like this. I'm going to tell Alex. I can't hide it anymore." Victor stepped inside without waiting for her to invite him, his presence overwhelming as always. "You think Alex will understand?" he asked, his voice rising. "He'll never forgive you for this. I'm the only one who can protect you now, Samantha. You're in this too deep. You made your choice, and now you have to live with it." Samantha felt a wave of fear wash over her. She had never seen Victor this angry before. The calm, collected man she had known was gone, replaced by someone desperate to maintain control at any cost. He had already made it clear that he would stop at nothing to cover up their affair, but she had never realized the extent of his ruthlessness until now. "Victor, please," Samantha pleaded, her voice trembling. "I just want to fix this. I want to do the right thing." But Victor wasn't listening. He stepped closer, his expression hardening. "The right thing?" he spat. "The right thing is for you to keep your mouth shut and do as you're told. If you don't, there will be consequences. Serious ones." Samantha's heart raced, panic seizing her. She had underestimated Victor's determination, and now she realized just how far he was willing to go to keep his secrets safe. Victor grabbed her by the arm, his grip tight and unyielding. "I didn't want it to come to this, Samantha," he said, his voice dark and threatening. "But you leave me no choice. If you think you can destroy my life, I'll destroy yours first." Tears filled Samantha's eyes as the weight of his words hit her. She had never imagined it would come to this. Victor, the man she had fallen for, the man she had trusted, was now a threat to her very life. She had never thought he was capable of something so violent, but standing in front of her was the man she had always known in his most dangerous form. With a sudden movement, Victor shoved her back toward the couch, his hand still gripping her. Samantha stumbled, falling into the soft cushions. She tried to push him away, but he was too strong. The rage in his eyes was unmistakable. For the first time, she realized that her life was in real danger. "You won't tell anyone," Victor said again, his voice low and menacing. "Not a word to Alex, not a word to anyone, or I'll make sure you regret it." Samantha's mind raced. She couldn't stay in this situation any longer. The fear and the tension had become too much. Her only option now was to escape. Escape from Victor, from the affair, and from the dark reality she had found herself trapped in. With everything she had left, Samantha pushed him off, scrambling to her feet. She ran to the door, but Victor was right behind her, his hand grabbing her wrist before she could make it outside. "Don't you dare run from me," he snarled, his grip painfully tight. But in that moment, something inside Samantha snapped. She had no other choice but to fight. She kicked and struggled, pulling herself free from his grasp. "Let me go!" she screamed. But Victor was relentless. In his fury, he shoved her back, sending her crashing into the coffee table. The sharp edges of the table cut into her skin, and the pain sent waves of dizziness through her. For a brief moment, everything seemed to freeze. But the anger in Victor's eyes remained unchanged. The man she had once admired now stood over her, a cold, calculating predator. "You've sealed your fate, Samantha," he muttered as he advanced on her once more. As she lay there bloodied and bruised, Samantha realized the horrifying truth. There would be no escape for her. Victor Monroe would stop at nothing to protect his secret, and in this twisted game, she was the pawn, destined to be silenced forever. Detective Olivia Thompson had seen her fair share of grim crime scenes, but nothing prepared her for what awaited her when she received the call about the Monroe house. The case, initially reported as a missing person situation, quickly escalated when neighbors reported hearing loud arguments the night before. By the time Olivia arrived, the house was already roped off with yellow tape, and uniformed officers were combing through every inch of the property. Samantha Monroe, Alex's wife, was gone. She had vanished without a trace, leaving only bloodstains on the living room floor and broken furniture to suggest something far more sinister had taken place. What struck Detective Thompson immediately was the violent nature of the scene. A bloodied coffee table lay smashed in the center of the room, and the splatters on the floor painted a horrific picture. Whoever had been in that room had been desperate, angry, and dangerous. As she made her way through the house, Olivia's mind raced. The investigation had only just begun, but she already had a gut feeling that this wasn't a simple case of domestic strife. There was more going on here than met the eye, and she wasn't about to let the details slip away. Her first stop was the kitchen, where she found Alex Monroe sitting in a chair, staring blankly ahead. His face was pale, and his eyes looked as if they hadn't seen sleep in days. Olivia approached slowly, her voice calm but firm. "Mr. Monroe, I'm Detective Thompson. Can you tell me what happened here?" she asked, her gaze never leaving his. Alex looked up at her with glazed eyes, struggling to find words. He had been waiting for news on his wife for hours, but his thoughts were still disjointed, the shock and confusion overwhelming him. I don't know. I came home last night and she wasn't here. Her phone, her purse, nothing's here," he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't understand. She wasn't the type to just leave like this." Olivia nodded, taking in the details. Alex's confusion was genuine, and the absence of his wife seemed to be eating away at him. But there was something else beneath the surface, a nagging feeling that Alex was hiding something. She needed to dig deeper, but for now she let him speak. Where were you last night? Olivia pressed. I was at a meeting, Alex replied quickly, but the way his gaze flickered gave Olivia pause. It went late. I didn't think to check on her until this morning. Olivia noted the slight hesitation. She wasn't sure if it was guilt or something else, but there was clearly more to the story than Alex was letting on. Have you heard from her at all? She continued. No, he said, shaking his head. I called her this morning, and she didn't pick up. That's when I started getting worried. I didn't think it was anything serious, but then his voice trailed off, as if he were reconsidering the gravity of the situation. Then I came home and saw the mess. Olivia nodded again, keeping her tone neutral. She needed to understand what had led to this violent scene, and it seemed Alex might be hiding something important. Did your wife have any enemies? Anyone who might have wanted to harm her? She asked, narrowing her eyes. Alex hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the question. No, not that I know of, he replied quickly. Everyone liked her. She wasn't involved in anything dangerous. As Olivia considered Alex's answers, her mind drifted back to the bloody scene in the living room. This was no random act of violence. Whoever had attacked Samantha had done so with intent, and Olivia couldn't shake the feeling that someone close to her was involved. She gave Alex a brief, apologetic look. We'll need to talk to your father as well. Can you tell me where he is? Alex blinked, clearly caught off guard. My father? Why? We're trying to piece together what happened. He might know something. Alex's expression hardened, but he nodded reluctantly. He's probably at the office. He works late most nights. Olivia made a mental note to visit Victor Monroe's office next. It was clear the investigation was beginning to point in a direction she hadn't expected. She was about to learn just how much Victor Monroe had to lose, and how far he was willing to go to protect his secrets. Victor Monroe's office was a sleek, modern building located in the heart of Miami's financial district. The building itself was an architectural marvel, towering above the city with windows that stretched from floor to ceiling. Inside, the air smelled faintly of expensive cologne and polished wood. Victor's presence loomed over everything. The walls were lined with awards, photos of him with political figures, and advertisements for his business ventures. Olivia walked into the lobby, where a receptionist greeted her. She explained that she needed to speak to Mr. Monroe about his daughter-in-law's disappearance. The receptionist hesitated but then nodded, making a quick phone call. Within moments, she informed Olivia that Victor was on his way down to meet her. When Victor arrived, Olivia was struck by his appearance. He was tall, immaculately dressed in a tailored suit, his demeanor cool and controlled. He extended a hand to her, his expression neutral. Detective Thompson, he said smoothly. What brings you to my office today? Olivia shook his hand, studying his face closely. I'm investigating the disappearance of your daughter-in-law, Samantha Monroe. I need to ask you a few questions. Victor's eyebrows raised slightly, but his composure remained unshaken. Samantha? What has happened to her? We're still trying to piece things together, Olivia replied, but we believe she may be in danger. Do you know where she is, Mr. Monroe? Victor shook his head, his lips curling into a small smile that didn't reach his eyes. I'm afraid I don't know, Detective. Samantha has been distant lately. She and my son have been going through some personal issues. I haven't spoken to her recently. Olivia studied his face, watching for any signs of dishonesty. There was something about Victor's response that didn't sit right with her. He seemed too composed, too calm for someone whose family member was missing. She had a feeling that Victor was hiding something. But what? I understand, Olivia said, choosing her next words carefully. Can you think of anyone who might have a reason to harm her? Any conflicts or problems she might have been involved in? Victor paused for a moment, as though considering the question carefully. Samantha is a lovely woman, he said, his voice soft but firm. But like anyone, she has her problems. She was struggling with some personal things. It's possible she simply left to get away for a while. Olivia wasn't convinced. You wouldn't happen to know if Samantha was seeing anyone recently, would you? Victor's face tightened ever so slightly. What do you mean by that, Detective? I mean, was she involved in any relationships that might have caused trouble? Any affairs, perhaps? Victor's gaze hardened, and for a moment Olivia thought he might react aggressively. Instead, he gave a tight smile. My son and I don't keep tabs on Samantha's personal life, Detective. I suggest you focus your investigation elsewhere. Olivia knew she was getting closer to something important, but she didn't push any further for now. Victor Monroe was a master of maintaining control, but she was beginning to see cracks in the facade. The tension in his voice, the subtle defensiveness. It all pointed to the possibility that he knew more than he was letting on. With a polite nod, Olivia excused herself. As she left the office building, she couldn't help but feel that she was one step closer to uncovering the truth. There was something deeply troubling about Victor's reaction, something that told her this case was far from over, and it was only going to get darker. Detective Olivia Thompson didn't sleep much that night. As she sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by files and photographs of Samantha Monroe, her mind raced. The more she dug into the case, the more layers seemed to peel away, revealing a picture of deceit, danger, and perhaps something even darker lurking beneath the surface. She had spent the past few hours reviewing Samantha's medical records, looking for any hint that could explain her disappearance. The HIV diagnosis was particularly troubling. It wasn't something Olivia had expected to find, but it added a new layer of complexity to the case. She had already suspected Victor Monroe of hiding something, but now she was starting to see a clearer picture. Samantha's affair with Victor had clearly not been the simple love story it appeared to be. Olivia's phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. It was her partner, Detective David Harris. "Olivia, I've got something," David said. "You were right to focus on Victor. I ran a background check on him, and it turns out he's been involved in some unsavory business dealings over the years. Nothing we can pin on him directly, but enough to suggest he's been covering his tracks for a long time." Olivia's pulse quickened. "What kind of dealings?" "Nothing concrete yet, but we've found some connections between Victor and several shady individuals in the city," David explained. "It seems like he's been playing both sides. On the surface, he's a businessman, but there's something darker going on, and we're not the only ones interested in him. It looks like Victor has made some enemies over the years." Olivia was silent for a moment, taking it all in. She had suspected that Victor was hiding something, but this was more than she had anticipated. The deeper she went, the more the case seemed to lead back to him. "I need you to dig deeper," Olivia said, her voice low but determined. "Check out his associates, his financial records, anything that could give us a motive. We're looking at more than just a missing persons case now." "Understood," David replied. "I'll get on it right away." As Olivia hung up, she couldn't help but feel a surge of hope. The investigation was moving forward, but she knew it wasn't going to be easy. Victor Monroe was a man with a lot to lose, and she had a feeling he'd stop at nothing to protect his secrets. The next day, Olivia returned to the Monroe house. She had spent hours combing through the scene the previous evening, but there was still something she needed to confirm. She wasn't convinced that Samantha had simply disappeared on her own accord. No, she was sure that Victor had something to do with it. The house was still eerily quiet, the only sound the hum of the air conditioning and the occasional creak of the floorboards. Olivia stood in the center of the living room, taking in the details. The bloodstains on the floor had been marked and photographed, but they hadn't yet been fully analyzed. It was too early to tell if the blood belonged to Samantha or if someone else had been involved. But something about the mess felt deliberate. The broken furniture, the scattered items. It was as if the attacker had been searching for something. But what? Olivia's thoughts were interrupted when her phone buzzed again. It was David. "I found something," David said. "Victor Monroe had a meeting scheduled with a man named Ramon Vasquez 2 days before Samantha went missing. Vasquez is a known figure in the underground drug trade. There's a paper trail that links them together, and it looks like they've been doing business for years." Olivia's mind raced as she processed the information. "Do we know what they were discussing?" "Not yet," David replied, "but I've got a lead. Vasquez is in town, and I'm trying to track him down. I'll keep you updated." Olivia couldn't believe what she was hearing. If Victor Monroe had been involved in the drug trade, it would explain a lot. His wealth, his connections, his need to keep everything under wraps. But it still didn't explain why Samantha had been caught in the middle of all of this. She walked over to the broken coffee table and crouched down, examining the pieces more closely. There had to be something here. A clue, an indication of what had happened in this room the night before Samantha vanished. As she traced her fingers along the edge of a shattered glass vase, something caught her eye. A small, crumpled piece of paper was wedged between the broken shards. Carefully, she retrieved it and unfolded it, her heart racing as she read the words scrawled across the page. Meet me at the old warehouse. Midnight. Don't bring anyone. It'll be over soon. Olivia's breath caught in her throat. The note was a clear message, but who had written it? And why had it been left behind? She quickly took a picture of the note and placed it back in her evidence bag. She had a feeling this was the break she needed. The warehouse mentioned in the note was located on the outskirts of Miami, an old abandoned industrial site that had been the scene of several shady dealings in the past. As Olivia stood up, her mind raced with possibilities. If the note was real, it meant someone had been planning something at the warehouse, and Samantha had been involved. But who else had been there? And what had really happened the night she went missing? She didn't have all the answers, but she knew one thing for sure. She was getting closer to the truth. Victor Monroe's web of lies was starting to unravel, and Olivia was determined to follow every lead until she reached the heart of the mystery. The sun had barely set over the Miami skyline when Detective Olivia Thompson drove towards the outskirts of the city. Her thoughts were consumed by the crumpled note she had found in the Monroe house. It was an unusual clue, one that hinted at a meeting, a secret rendezvous, and an event that had likely led to the horrific turn of events in the Monroe family. She had to get to the warehouse and find out what had happened there. As she approached the old industrial site, the darkness of the evening enveloped the area. The warehouse was a massive, dilapidated building, its rusted exterior standing in stark contrast to the modernity of the city just a few miles away. The air felt thick with the tension of the unknown as Olivia parked her car a few blocks away, making sure to remain out of sight. She didn't know if the person behind the note would still be there, but she couldn't afford to take any chances. The warehouse had been abandoned for years, a place that had witnessed countless shady deals over time. According to the records, the site had been shut down after multiple safety violations, leaving it to deteriorate. But in the darkness, it seemed like the perfect place for someone to hide something. Or someone. Olivia took a deep breath and adjusted her jacket. She was alone tonight, and she needed to rely on her instincts. She had brought a flashlight, her gun, and a recorder to capture any conversation or evidence she might find. She had no idea what she was about to walk into, but she knew it was crucial to the case. The warehouse loomed ahead, its broken windows casting faint, eerie shadows. Olivia crept along the side, trying to remain as quiet as possible. She heard no voices, no sounds of movement. It was dead silent, save for the distant hum of city life. Her heart raced as she approached the entrance, where the door was slightly ajar. She could hear faint whispers coming from inside, just loud enough for her to make out some words. Carefully, Olivia slipped inside through the gap, her footsteps muffled against the dusty floor. The air inside was musty, thick with the scent of mildew and decay. The interior was cavernous, with piles of old equipment and broken pallets scattered about. The dim light from her flashlight flickered against the walls, casting long, jagged shadows. As she moved deeper into the warehouse, the whispers grew louder. Olivia took cover behind a stack of crates, her eyes scanning the space ahead. She saw two men standing near a table, their conversation urgent and hushed. "Victor's getting nervous," one man said, his voice low but clear. "He doesn't know who to trust anymore. The deal's almost done. All we need is that last shipment." Olivia's breath caught in her throat. The man mentioned Victor. That could only mean one thing. The powerful and mysterious Victor Monroe was involved in this deal, and it wasn't just a simple business transaction. There was something bigger happening here, something far more dangerous. "Did he send his son to take care of things?" the second man asked. His voice sounded familiar, but Olivia couldn't place it. "I don't think Alex is in on this," the first man replied. "Victor's been keeping him in the dark. He's been distracted with his wife, and now, well, we've got a mess to clean up." The second man laughed darkly. "A mess? You mean the wife who's causing all the problems? That's the last thing Victor needs right now. If she talks to the wrong person, it's over." The words hung in the air like a threat. Olivia's mind raced. Who were these men talking about? Was Samantha still alive? If she was, she had to be somewhere nearby, and time was running out to find her. Olivia's heart pounded in her chest as she crept closer to the men, trying to gather more information. But before she could get any closer, a faint creaking sound echoed through the warehouse, followed by the thudding footsteps of someone entering. "Did you hear that?" one of the men asked, his voice suddenly tense. Olivia froze. Her flashlight flickered as she quickly turned it off, plunging the warehouse into darkness. She held her breath, waiting to see if they would notice her presence. A moment later, she heard footsteps approaching the crates. She pressed herself flat against the cold concrete floor, praying that the men wouldn't spot her. As the footsteps drew nearer, Olivia's mind raced. She knew she had to act fast. She reached for her gun, her fingers trembling slightly, and prepared herself for whatever would happen next. She wasn't sure who else might be involved, but she wasn't going to leave without answers. The footsteps stopped just a few feet away. Olivia's breath caught in her throat. She could hear the men speaking again, but their voices were low and cautious. "She's here," one of them said, his tone laced with uncertainty. "I think we should finish this tonight. The longer we wait, the more dangerous this gets." "Yeah," the second man agreed. "Victor won't like it, but if she's alive, she's a liability. We can't let her go free." Olivia's eyes widened as she realized what they were talking about. Samantha Monroe. They were talking about killing her. The tension in the warehouse grew unbearable. Olivia knew she had to make her move before it was too late. She carefully stood up and moved silently toward the men, her heart racing. She had to get to them before they could carry out whatever horrific plan they had in store. Suddenly, she felt a presence behind her. She spun around, her gun raised, but before she could react, a voice called out to her in the darkness. "Detective Thompson." Olivia froze. The voice was calm, collected, and all too familiar. "Victor Monroe," she said, her voice cold with disbelief. Victor stepped forward, his silhouette emerging from the shadows. He was impeccably dressed as always, but there was no mistaking the dark intent in his eyes. "I should have known you would come here," he said, his tone icy and controlled. "But you're too late, detective. This is bigger than you realize." Olivia's mind raced as she processed his words. Victor had orchestrated all of this. The affair with Samantha, the HIV diagnosis, and now a brutal plan to silence her forever. But what had pushed him to this point? What was he willing to do to protect his empire? Victor smiled darkly. "You've been poking around in things you don't understand. It's time for you to leave, detective. You don't want to get caught in the middle of this." Olivia knew she had no choice. She had to act fast, before it was too late for Samantha, and before Victor could put an end to everything she had uncovered. She raised her gun, her voice steady despite the danger. "Don't move, Victor. It's over." The tension in the warehouse was unbearable. Victor Monroe stood just a few feet away, his eyes locked on Olivia's as she aimed her gun at him. Her heart pounded in her chest, each beat echoing in the silence of the abandoned space. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. Everything she had worked for, every step she had taken in this investigation, had led her to this point. But she wasn't about to back down. Not now. "Put the gun down, detective," Victor said, his voice calm but chilling. "You don't understand what's happening here. You've only seen part of the picture." Olivia's eyes never left him as she spoke, her grip on the gun steady. "I understand enough. Samantha Monroe, she's been caught in the middle of your web, and I know what you've been hiding." Victor's lips curled into a sinister smile, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes. A mixture of frustration and something more dangerous. "You think you know the whole story? You think it's all about Samantha?" Olivia's mind raced. She wasn't sure what Victor was getting at, but she was certain that he wasn't telling the truth. She couldn't let him manipulate the situation. "What's really going on, Victor?" she demanded, her voice unwavering. "Why did you drag your son and his wife into this? Why did you risk everything to cover up Samantha's disappearance?" For a moment there was silence. Then Victor's expression softened, as if he were contemplating whether or not to reveal the truth. "You think it's just about a woman?" he said finally, his voice almost pitying. "It's much bigger than that. Samantha's pregnancy. That wasn't part of the plan. You see, it wasn't just about an affair. It was about power and control." Olivia's stomach tightened as she realized what Victor was implying. "The baby," she whispered. "You knew she was pregnant." Victor nodded slowly. "She was going to ruin everything. My son was falling in love with her. She had his heart, and if she had kept the baby, it would have complicated everything. The business, my life, my empire. I couldn't let that happen." Olivia's mind spun. She had suspected that Victor's motives were about more than just Samantha's affair, but this was something else entirely. "You're telling me you were willing to kill her to protect your secrets?" Victor's eyes darkened, and the coldness in his voice was palpable. "She was a threat. The moment she got pregnant, I knew she would want more. More from my son, more from me. And I couldn't let that happen. I've worked too hard to build this life. Everything I've done, everything I've sacrificed, it was all for my family, my legacy. But Samantha was a liability, and I couldn't let her take that away." Olivia felt a surge of anger, but she kept her voice steady. "And now you're trying to cover it all up. You think you can silence me, but I'm not going anywhere." Victor's smile returned, but it was twisted, cruel. "You think you're in control? You think this ends with me behind bars?" He took a step forward, but Olivia quickly raised her gun, her finger poised on the trigger. "Don't move," she warned. He stopped, his expression turning more serious. "You don't realize how dangerous this is, Detective. I've made powerful enemies. If you think you can stop me, you're wrong." Olivia's mind raced. There was something in Victor's words that struck her, something that made her realize how far he was willing to go to protect his empire. He wasn't just a man with a few skeletons in his closet. He was part of something much larger, something that could reach beyond this moment. "I don't care who your enemies are," Olivia said, her voice cold. "I'm not leaving until I've got the truth. And I will take you down, Victor." Victor studied her for a moment, his gaze calculating. "You think you're the first one to challenge me? You won't be the last, but you'll regret it." Just then, Olivia heard the sound of approaching footsteps. She spun around, her gun still raised. The two men she had overheard earlier emerged from the shadows, their hands raised in surrender. "I told you it was too risky," one of them said, his voice trembling. "Victor, you said you had it under control, but now—" "Shut up," Victor snapped, his voice low but full of menace. He turned his attention back to Olivia. "This is your last chance, Detective. Walk away now and I'll let you live. You don't know what you're dealing with." Olivia's jaw clenched. She wasn't afraid of him. "I'm not leaving without Samantha. Tell me where she is, Victor." Now Victor's expression faltered, just for a moment, before his cold mask returned. "She's gone," he said flatly. "It's over. There's nothing you can do." Olivia's heart sank, but she refused to let it show. She knew she couldn't let him get away with this, not after everything that had happened. Samantha had been a victim of Victor's manipulation, and Olivia couldn't let that be the end of the story. "You think it's over?" Olivia asked, her voice unwavering. "It's just beginning." In that instant, Olivia's phone buzzed. She quickly glanced at it, and her heart skipped a beat when she saw the message. It was from David. "We've got a lead on Samantha. She's alive. We're at the old pier, 20 minutes away." Without hesitation, Olivia turned to Victor. "I'm not done with you," she said, her voice cold with resolve. "You're not going to get away with this." Before he could respond, she turned on her heel and bolted for the exit. Her mind was set. The investigation wasn't over. If Samantha was still alive, she was going to find her. And when she did, Victor Monroe would finally pay for the lives he had destroyed.